Hey, and welcome to episode 8 of Think Like a Hacker. We've got a great show for you today. We're going to cover the news with Kathy Zant, and then I've got a really great interview with some friends of mine in Idyllwild, Chris and Katie Bayer, who run a coffee roastery. And I chatted about WordPress with them, as well as running a small business, and of course, coffee. So get ready for a great show. All right, let's dive straight into the news. Kathy, how are you doing today?
Great. How you doing?
I am awesome. So yeah, let's just dive straight into it. I guess the first story we've got here is something from Troy Hunt. He wrote one of his wonderfully detailed posts about a watch called TicTocTrack that is used to track your kids, but it has some issues, right?
It sure does have some issues. It's, first of all, huge, humongous, this giant watch that you put on your little kid. But the kid thinks it's really cool because it's pink and it's a new gadget, huh?
Yeah, and Troy is of course the guy who runs Have I Been Pwned. He's a very well-known security researcher, and I think he's made a pretty good contribution to the information security community. And Troy did a deep dive on this watch and on this technology in general. And do you want to talk us through what he found, Kathy?
Sure. Well, he put this watch on Ellie, I believe her name was, and as he also hired a pen tester to see what they could find. And as Ellie was wearing this watch, the pen tester found that there was an insecure direct object reference vulnerability in their API that allowed anyone to talk to your kid. And he's got an actual video on the site. So this icon shows up on the watch, and you can make it say "Dad," and the pen tester could actually talk to the child without any interaction by the child. So the kid wasn't actually like selecting that I want to talk to Dad. It's just like Dad showed up and started talking, which was, I mean, when you see the video, it's just a little bit freaky that just anyone could exploit this vulnerability and talk to your kid. When they investigated, the UK agent for Gator, the watch manufacturer, said they didn't have enough money for security, or they wouldn't be able to afford their staff's Christmas party. That was...
It sounds like sensible logic. What do you think?
It does. Well, you have to have priorities.
Oh my goodness! Wow. So this technology, I mean, this kind of technology, this or person tracking technology, has had many security issues over the years, and Troy covers that in great detail in his article, and we'll definitely include a link in the show notes. But there's a couple of we made a couple bullet points over here of some of the vendors who've had issues with this kind of technology in the past. VTech leaked millions of kids' info after they registered with smart tablets. Cloud Pets, you probably remember that one. I think that was back in 2015. Leaked kids' voices because of teddy bears that recorded them, and then they stored the recordings in a public database with no password. MSpy, which is a spyware app on phones, leaked data. Also, SpyPhone and MobiSpy did the same thing. The Norwegian Consumer Council discovered flaws in products from Gator, GPS for Barn, and Explorer. And these flaws included the ability for a stranger to take control of the watch, track, eavesdrop, and communicate with the child, which is exactly what's happening in the case of the TicTocTrack watch. And even after Gator fixed their security flaws, the next version had worse flaws, including storing parents' and kids' voice messages on an openly available server. What's really interesting is one of the things Troy mentions in his article is that Germany has outright banned this class of watch. And the quote is, German parents are being told to destroy smartwatches they have bought for their children after the country's telecoms regulator put a blanket ban in place to prevent sale of the devices amid growing privacy concerns. And Troy went ahead, and as Kathy mentioned, he bought the TicTocTrack watch and discovered there's a tangle web of corporate partnerships where the data is hosted. The watch has a vulnerability that lets the attacker put the kid anywhere they want. For example, make the child appear kidnapped, or kidnap the child and keep the location appearing to be a safe place. And then, of course, communicate with the child, as Kathy mentioned, send them SMSs. And the pen test partners that Troy hired did responsible disclosure. So they disclosed the issue to TicTocTrack, and they put up they sent out a very corporate message to their customers, kind of underplaying the risk, but they did take down the affected services until they could actually fix them. I do not have kids. I have an Australian cattle dog, and I do respect his privacy. But Kathy, you of course do. And what's your take on this?
Well, my take is both of my kids are fairly technological literate. They understand how the internet works. They've been to DEF CON, so they have an understanding that there are what a black hat hacker is and what a white hat hacker is, which is, I think, a distinction that not a lot of kids have. My daughter wears her pen tester for hire shirt to school, and she's had one child come up to her and said, "You're a scary hacker."
How old is she?
She's 10.
That's great.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, to her, it's like this whole, what's mom's work, right? And but they're aware, and they're aware that just like, bad guys are out there in the real world, there are bad guys on the internet, and so they're very aware of. I mean, my daughter actually had an experience with one of her friends who introduced her to a new friend on the internet, Elizabeth. And I'm like, "Where's Elizabeth from?" And she's like, "Well, I was asking her, and my friend had given Elizabeth this password." And so, obviously my daughter was aware enough to ask the right questions and to be able to say, there's a problem here, because I talked to her about it. And having kids growing up in the internet age, you have to talk to them about security. You have to talk to them about what a password is and how you don't share passwords, how you don't share user accounts, things like that, just so that, because they're going to run into these types of things. Sitting in the same room with your child and watching what they're doing on their phone or a tablet, and understanding what they're looking at and talking to them about what they're looking at, and understanding, what types of things are that they may be exposed to. And when these issues come up, not getting like angry at your kid, but talking to them through it and using these things as sort of natural consequences, learning experiences, so that they understand when they see something that doesn't feel right, that they should talk to an adult and kind of get some guidance through those kinds of situations.
Oh my goodness. I mean, this literally sounds like the conversations that people were having in the 1980s of how to explain to your kid about the facts of life and where babies come from and that kind of thing. And, the vocabulary that you're using, I mean, it is, it sounds very similar to that, because it's kind of a delicate subject. It's a complex subject. It's nuanced, and, one has to kind of walk your child through the understanding all of that. So, but it's interesting that cybersecurity, as you're saying, I guess it has in more sophisticated households, and will ultimately become a branch of childhood education, or a big category in childhood education.
Definitely. And my daughter has had to go through, she has technology class, and so she's like, she thinks it's funny. They're like, "They said that I shouldn't share passwords." I already knew that, she's more adept than what they're teaching her, which is great and everything. But I run into so many other parents who are like deathly afraid of technology or of apps that they've never used. So the big ones right now are like TikTok, and Snapchat. You have to get on there, even though it's like, oh my gosh, Snapchat, I have no business being on Snapchat. You have business being on Snapchat if your kid's on it. You have to understand the technology too. So even though you might not be like posting crazy videos and, screenshots or selfies of yourself, you have to understand what the technology is, how it works, so that you can be aware of the challenges, and also be aware of what your kids are posting online. And there's a difference between knowing there's selfie videos on TikTok, and then there's aesthetic videos where your child doesn't appear at all I just learned this myself, that an aesthetic video is something that is sort of this creative, artistic video where your child isn't posting pictures of themselves. That's always a positive.
So it's interesting because you're saying that parents have an obligation to stay technology literate so that they can understand this new realm of existence, if you like, that their child exists in, right? There's the physical world and there's cyberspace, and
Yeah.
their child is interacting in cyberspace, having various interactions, and those change as they grow up and so on. And to help to have the capability to educate your child about cyberspace, you need to understand it. You need to actually spend time in that kind of realm of existence yourself. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting.
And follow, look at who's interacting with your child on Instagram or on TikTok, who are their followers, and who is your child following, and what kinds of conversations are they having. And it doesn't mean you have to like put I definitely recommend no like spyware apps, because then you're just like adding another layer of privacy concern. But it's important for you as the parent to be that spyware app, and to watch what your child is saying, what conversations. They also use a lot of Google Hangouts, and they'll have like these group conversations. And it's interesting because when I was a kid, and things, goofy drama types of things would happen in the classroom, and you'd come home and at least it'd be like, okay, I can shut my door and I don't have to hear about it anymore. And our kids these days, all of the stuff is kind of following them along into their private world. And if their phone is in their room, they still have the classroom drama in there with them. And so we limit screen time for our younger one, just because she needs a break from it. I think we all need a break from it sometimes.
Yeah, and I tell you, we can chat about this for ages, because there's another aspect, and you just alluded to this, and that is that data never dies.
Yeah.
And so where you have an argument in the real world, the next day most people have forgotten about it, or maybe the next week if it was a bad one. But in cyberspace, those comments, that comment thread is there for perpetuity. And in fact, even when you delete the website, archive.org would have captured it, and people can still look it up. And so there's that dimension to it as well. But just bringing this back to TicTocTrack, it's really interesting because people are trying to protect their kids, or what did Troy or one of his colleagues call it? Helicopter parenting, I think.
Yeah.
Sort of monitoring your children. But in fact, it results in exposing their data online, and that data is vulnerable to breaches, and then potentially exposing your child to online predators or hackers or threat actors of some sort. And what I think is interesting about that is that in the real world, you're limited in the number of people that you can interact with and that you meet every day and that you're exposed to. But in cyberspace, you're exposed to the entire globe. And if you are using an application that has a severe vulnerability in it, you've painted a giant target on yourself, or in this case, on your child. And so your child is more likely to be, I hate to use the term because it's a bit of a rough one, but exploited, both in terms of cybersecurity and perhaps in other terms, by extreme elements of society, simply because there is a much larger number of people that now have access to your child through this device that is flawed. Right. And so the intent there is to protect, but in fact what you're doing is exposing your child to a much larger potential population of threat actors of various kinds. So a really interesting one, and I think the German government in banning these devices is made a very good call. So we'll see how this unfolds.
Yeah.
Great. Well, on to our next story, and this is a change in Google's AMP standard. Do you want to talk us through this one, Kathy?
Sure. Well, let's look at what AMP is. First of all, accelerated mobile pages is a standard that's been created by, or an application that's been created by Google, that gives mobile users a very fast web experience. And so a lot of publishers use AMP, but more industries are starting to transition into this. I've talked to a number of plugin developers and people in the WordPress community who are developing for AMP because it makes for a faster loading experience for WordPress. Now what we're seeing is that AMP pages are now going to show the original URL in Chrome's address bar. So if you're using the Chrome browser, it will now appear, instead of interacting with the AMP page, which is hosted on Google's servers, it's going to appear more like you're interacting with the actual website. So if you're looking at an AMP page on, say, the Washington Post, which is actually on Google servers and serving that to your mobile device, it will now look like you are actually on the Washington Post's website. And this is coming from web packaging for AMP. And there's something with the SSL that is making this change, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah. So TLS, this web packaging standard for AMP has incorporated TLS, and the way it works is that it verifies that the content on the original site has not changed from what Google is serving up, and if that's the case, then the user experience is that they're visiting an AMP site. It's hosted on Google servers, but in fact, what the user sees is the domain and the full URL in the location bar, along with a TLS or SSL green lock. So from a user's perspective, it really appears as if they're on the site and that they're secured with TLS. But in reality, they're actually talking to Google servers, not the origin site, and that's who's serving up the content. I have mixed feelings about this because it feels a little bit like it breaks the web. You think that you're talking to one entity and you're actually talking to another. Of course, Google is the biggest proponent of AMP, and Google like to think that they do no evil. Maybe a lot of other people like to think that too. I like to test these standards by thinking about what would happen if a less trustworthy entity or an entity in a country or a jurisdiction that is less trustworthy implements something like this and encourages websites to allow them to do this. In that case, you would be talking to a potentially untrustworthy entity, thinking that you're talking to the backend website and that you're secured via TLS, but in fact you're not. So I don't love this, but I know that there's a huge focus on speed on the web, and one of the reasons for that is because this all started because of some data that Google posted. It's got to be almost 10 years ago now, where they showed that if for every tenth of a second that a site slows down, it has a significant impact on the number of users that don't stick around and the level of user engagement, and also users making purchases from that site. And so that was the first kind of piece of data that really influenced people to try to make their sites faster. And then the next one was that Google, and I think it was Matt Cutts, who is on Google's search quality team, told the world that basically Google are using site speed as a ranking factor or as a ranking signal. And so, and then AMP was born, and Google said that they love AMP and everyone wants to keep Google happy. And so they implemented AMP in the hopes that the increased site speed would improve their ranking, and also their use of AMP would improve their ranking. And so that's how this has unfolded. Like I said, I don't love it, but do you have any thoughts on this, Kathy?
I haven't thought it through completely, but I wonder what's in it for Google as an advertising company that, their primary business is to serve ads, right? And so there has to be something in it for them in terms of what does this do to advertising revenue? How does this improve their business? And then what does that mean to the companies that are using AMP? Obviously, if information, if the data in terms of who's viewing pages and how they're interacting with the website is resident on Google servers, that gives them information and that gives them the ability to serve more targeted ads and to understand their users. And I'm not sure, I don't have the data if this information in terms of how that's all happening is actually shared with publishers, but it's kind of gives, I think it gives Google a leg up in terms of the advertising revenue.
Yeah, and I do think that publishers and Google's interests are aligned in that sense. They're partnering with Google. They want more ad impressions. They want people to engage with ads and so on.
Yeah.
And Google takes a cut of that, as does the publisher and so on. So we'd have to look at the data flows as well. When data is sent to the site, how does it flow through Google servers and so on. But it's interesting. So that's the new development in the AMP standard. And if you have any thoughts on this, definitely tweet at Kathy Zant or at mmaunder. I think we'd love to hear your input as a publisher, see how you feel about this change and the change in the user experience in terms of the site URL actually appearing in the location bar of the browser. And Kathy, the next story that we've got here, I am going to totally chicken out and hand this one to you.
Why? Oh my gosh.
And I think it's the second time I've handed a more delicate story to you. So
yeah, wasn't this the one that I was like saying, hey, let's get Mikey. We'll make Mikey
right,
talk about this one.
Right. We'll get him next week.
Yeah, we'll get him next week. We'll have to get a nice juicy one for Mikey.
Agreed.
Okay, so we saw an article in the last week on The Independent stating that the United Kingdom is going to strengthen the restrictions on pornography starting July 15th. So on July 15th, all internet users will be forced to prove that they're over 18 or they will be blocked from seeing adult content. And it's not going to be just, yes, I'm over 18 or here's my birth date. There's going to be new, more, quote, robust age verification checks on users. And these checks could include having internet users enter personal data into privately owned database or buying passes from news agents. And if pornographic websites do not comply with these rules, they could have payment services withdrawn or be blocked from access in the UK. So UK users would not be able to reach these websites, which that seems kind of naive, don't you think, Mark?
Oh my goodness, where to start? There's so much broken with this, and it literally is like the 1970s called and they want their policy back. It's absurd. So the idea that you would buy a pass from a news agent to access pornographic material, whoever wrote this policy is thinking in terms of, well, that's where people get their porn, so we'll, make them go and buy a pass for the internet at the news agent, which is absurd. The other thing that I think is a bit of a joke here is the enforcing body is the British Board of Film Classification, or the BBFC. They're actually the regulator. Now, those folks are, I'm sure, used to watching, sitting and watching movies all day on a big screen in some comfy chair with someone serving them a cold drink and filling out some paperwork when they say, what the film rating is going to be. The idea that they're staffed up to enforce this kind of policy in the cyber realm is laughable. They're going to have to transform themselves into a totally different organization, essentially an InfoSec organization. Yeah. And then the other thing that, and this is, I think, the really bigger issue that I have with this, is that this applies to all adult sites that anyone in the UK is accessing. And so that is any site on the internet. Now, what this is going to result in is, obviously, it makes it very difficult for folks who in the UK that are producing this kind of content. But I think that the number of entities in the UK and the amount of this kind of content that's produced in the UK is probably very, very little. Most of it is produced in other parts of the world. And so the idea that they're going to have payment services withdrawn, that assumes that the UK even has jurisdiction over those bodies, which they probably don't, or those entities that are those publishers, I should say, which they probably don't. And then the only other alternative that they mention here is that those sites will be blocked for all UK users. Well, what do you end up with there? It's the Great UK Firewall, just like the Great Firewall of China.
Right.
And so what you're going to end up with, if this, I, I, I mean, this has already been passed into law. It comes into effect in July. So what you're going to end up with, and the UK is going to be leading the charge on this, is a kind of balkanization of the internet as countries throw up borders in cyberspace that are similar to geographic borders. And if you're in the UK and you want to access certain content, well, the government decides what you can access if it's offshore. So you've got the UK internet, and then you've got the United States internet, and the China internet, and the Russian internet. And I think it's really disappointing because it's that kind of fragmentation or fracturing of the internet is does not. I don't think it's a good thing, and I think it's going to drive us apart globally rather than bring us together. What do you think, Kathy?
Well, Mark, you're not thinking of the children.
Oh, you had to go there. You remember
I had to go there.
Last week I was telling you about that sign in my neighborhood,
Yeah.
drive slowly for the sake of our children.
Yes.
And so that argument of, if you're anti my idea to make children safer, well, you're a child, you hate children, or you're threatening their safety, or whatever. And
Yeah, well, what they're saying here is that adult content is currently far too easy for children to access online, and they want the UK to be safe for the children.
Yeah, sure. So, I think we all care about the safety of children, and, the conversation that we had about TicTocTrack is an interesting one. There's some interesting parallels there because, that is a product that is trying to make children safer and is actually doing the exact opposite. This has the same rationale, but I think that there are many ways to make children safer, and the way that they're implementing this policy or what they've chosen to do here, I don't actually think that it's going to have the desired effect because children are incredibly creative when it comes to getting technology to do exactly what they want it to do.
Yeah.
And I think that what this is going to do is add an incredible amount of complexity to how the internet is operated in the UK. And I think that, let's just put it this way, the folks at the British Board of Film Classification definitely have their work cut out for them.
Yeah, and it definitely affects WordPress users because WordPress.org, the mission of WordPress.org is the democratization of publishing. That means everybody gets to publish. But what good is that if not everybody gets to read what's published, if that marketplace of ideas doesn't get to exist because organizations and governments like this are blocking access to what's been published?
Yeah, and I would say that even if you think that pornography should not be protected under free speech, think about it this way. To implement this, the UK government is going to have to put up infrastructure that allows them to regulate what people in the UK see on the rest of the internet. They're creating a new capability, and I think they have a little bit of that to a certain extent, but this gives them, the budget and the need to make that capability even more robust. And so limiting other forms of content becomes trivially easy. It's just a new rule that they add to the existing infrastructure. And so it begins this kind of flywheel turning that I think is going to result in not just adult or pornography being blocked, but I think potentially other content as well. For example, maybe it'll be hate speech, which will also be fine, but then it'll be, well, what kinds of hate speech? Perhaps certain political parties will have their speech limited, and perhaps it's the opposing party to the incumbent government. Who knows where this leads?
Definitely a slippery slope.
Yeah, that I wasn't going to say it, but that's the term that I think probably best describes this. So yeah, I think that's a little bit unfortunate, and we'll certainly keep an eye on that. But the next story we have here is from Wired, and it's research from Cisco's Talos security team. Last week, I think it was on Wednesday, they published some research in which cyber spies hijacked internet domains of entire countries, they're saying. This is a group that they're calling SeaTurtle, and I don't think that they're certain which country the threat actor is from, but they hit 40 organizations, and they compromised top-level domains in multiple countries. And the victims include telecoms, internet service providers, and registrars. What this is it's really DNS hijacking, and the attackers were hacking into registrars, and some of the registrars that were affected was Swedish NetNod and also Berkeley-based Packet Clearinghouse. The attackers would gain access to the registrar where they can make their own DNS servers authoritative for a domain. And what that means is, if you have a domain like I have markmaunder.com, so if I own markmaunder.com, I've registered it somewhere, and I don't think GoDaddy was affected in this, but I'm going to use them as an example just for clarity. So if I've registered that at, say, GoDaddy, and someone hacks into my GoDaddy account, they can change my domain settings to say that their own DNS servers are responsible for my domain, or the DNS term is authoritative for my domain. And they can then configure those DNS servers to say that my website, markmaunder.com, which is horribly out of date, please don't visit it, is at a different IP address, and it's an IP address of a server that they control. And so when you visit markmaunder.com, you're actually going to their server. What's worse is that they can put their own SSL certificate on that server. And so when you go to this now fake website, you've got the green lock, it looks like you're on my site, but actually you're not. And so that appears to be the crux of this attack. And obviously, there's some lessons to be learned here. It's critically important to secure access to your registrar account wherever you registered your domain, and where you configure which DNS servers are authoritative for your domain. As always, enable two-factor authentication on that account, because if you do, then even if you're spear-phished, if they don't have your device that you're using as your second factor, they can't gain access to the account. I would also suggest using a well-known registrar. Smaller, newer registrars might be less secure. I hate to beat up on new businesses and small businesses, but I think that's just a reality. And then I think also in evaluating your own security posture and how secure your website is, think like an attacker, or think like a hacker, which is obviously the title of this podcast. Think about how you would gain access to your account to change your DNS servers if you were a hacker. And that might lead you to implementing some new security controls. But this is a gnarly one, eh, Kathy?
Yeah, definitely. Your email address it's really important. I've seen a number of people who've had DNS kinds of problems, or a registrar compromised. Their registrar account has been compromised, and if you have your email address tied to your domain, and your DNS gets changed, your email goes away too. So it's always good to have sort of your registrar account set up to an email address like a Gmail account that you have two-factor on as well, and not tied to the domain.
Yeah, that is really, really great advice. And I'm literally just going to kind of repeat what you said, but in different words, because I think that's such a great point. So, and I'm just doing this for clarity, but if you sign up at a registrar with, I'm going to use my domain again as an example, so mark@markmaunder.com. I set up my account at some registrar. Well, I guess I would set it up with perhaps a Gmail account, and then because the domain wouldn't exist yet, right, Kathy? And then I'd have to change it to that email address.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, even if your registration gets expired, is expired, and you miss the email because you're too busy or whatever, and you're trying to, if it's tied to if your email address, the account that you have with your registrar, is tied to the same domain that you're dealing with that registration, then you might miss that email that it's then expired because the account is suspended, right? So it's really important that you have some kind of separation between your registrar account and the domain that you're registering.
Yeah, agreed. So I think, in fact, when we interviewed Brandy Lawson a few weeks back, she was saying that she advises people to not use Gmail accounts and get your own domain with your own email. And I think from a marketing perspective, that's really good advice.
Yeah.
But then if you then use that email to administer that domain, you're going to potentially lock yourself out of being able to access your domain. Or as Kathy pointed out, you're not going to get expiry notices because the domain no longer exists.
Right.
It's been taken offline.
Or that email then becomes, if something like this SeaTurtle group gets a hold of that domain or whatever, then your email is also then kind of falls into that swoop of being compromised as well. So it's good to have some separation between in terms of administration and for security purposes, to have some separation between your domain and your registrar.
Yeah, so to be honest, I think that a good recommendation here is to use a gmail.com address for registering your domains, because it's not tied to any of those domains. You can enable 2FA using Google Authenticator and so on. And I think they support hardware authentication as well. And it's a super secure email address, and it's not going to be affected if any of your domains go offline. Obviously, gmail.com isn't going to go offline, we hope, because then we've got bigger problems. And just kind of do that as a general policy, right?
Right, yeah. The case, and it's a pretty old case, but it was somebody who had a Twitter account that was like 2 characters or something. It was like this crazy Twitter account that was like really sought after, and it actually got compromised because of the domain name being tied to the registrar, and the registration was for his email and his domain was somehow compromised. I'll see if I can find an article about that and share that with.
So basically, someone grabbed his domain, because it expired, set up their own email server on that domain, set up a username at that domain, which was the same as his, did some kind of password recovery, probably using just email, and there was no 2FA set up, and snagged the Twitter account, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty old story, but it just kind of illustrates how to think about domain registration and your registrar and your account there, and how important it is to consider your email and your domain and how you're securing all of that.
Or how to get those sweet 2-letter Twitter usernames.
The wrong way, right?
Think like a hacker, right?
Think like a hacker.
Yeah.
And this is how hackers it's the same mindset of being able to find ways that not just technological vulnerabilities, but maybe this will segue into the next story too, but human vulnerability, right?
Yeah. And just to wrap up this SeaTurtle group that are doing DNS hijacking. So what they do there is they'll hijack the DNS, and then they'll set up their own server IPs on the domain names, and they'll capture credentials. And so that would be credentials being sent to any API endpoint, IMAP credentials, that kind of thing. And that, according to the research, that is what this threat group have been doing, is they've been using this technique to actually capture a lot of credentials. So that's kind of the end game there. But yeah, moving on to the next story. Kathy, the Nigerian Prince email scam still alive and well, I hear.
It's still alive and well. There was an article on CNBC last Thursday stating that the Nigerian Prince scam is still raking in over $700,000 a year. Can you believe it? It's just crazy. Wow. I thought this was a scam of lore, of years gone by, but it's still happening.
So retro.
It's so retro. Yes, everything old is new again. And the same article stated that Americans had lost over $26 million to scams last year. Investment fraud of all types, including Ponzi scams and pyramid schemes, cost victims the most, $8,600 on average for each scam. And victims of romance schemes or sweetheart scams lost an average of about $6,000.
That just makes me so sad.
It does. You want me to make you sadder?
Yeah.
You do, really.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I actually started researching this because I had a situation happen with an elderly family member, and I started just looking around, like what could possibly be going on right now. I mean, obviously I've seen tons of phishing kits out there and things like that. And this wasn't a phishing kit scam. This was an actual telephone scam. And so I started looking at the FBI's website, and they have tons of information about what they call 419 scams. Which I had not heard that this is what they call them, but actually a 419 scam, it refers to the violation of the section of the Nigerian Criminal Code, which is the 419 section of their laws. So that's why they call it that. So I learned something new. And these are very difficult for anyone to prosecute, both for the Nigerian government as well as foreign authorities. And it's not just email, it's dating websites, it's social media accounts, and it's the good old landline telephone. What they do is they establish connections and cultivate relationships, and eventually get around to persuading people to give up bank information or credit card information. And they're targeting people who are 45 to 75-year-old widowed men and women. Unfortunately, these people have money, and they are often very lonely. In other words, they're easy targets. So they're going after the human vulnerability of wanting to connect, of wanting to be able to trust someone, of wanting to be able often to help someone, to believe that good fortune is finally showing up for them. And I've also found that there's a reason why they call this the Nigerian Prince scheme. Now, for you and me, and anybody who has heard of the scam, it seems almost comical that someone would fall for a Nigerian Prince scheme that's going to promise you millions of dollars. But because we think it's comical, we automatically are self-selecting ourselves out of being scammed. By sending an email that repels all but the most gullible, the scammer gets the most promising marks to self-select themselves and tilts the true to false positive ratio in his favor. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
So it's a numbers game, right? And
it is.
By engaging in a scam that is quite absurd, if they send off, let's say, 100 million emails, the responses that they will get, the only responses or the only positive responses that they will get will be, I mean, there might be some law enforcement in there, but it's going to be folks that are not super technology savvy, maybe a little bit more gullible and so on, right?
And definitely somebody who's lonely and wants to connect and wants to believe in that their fortune is coming in.
Right. And so the sort of signal to noise ratio for this attacker is extremely good, because the only respondents are highly likely to get taken by the scam.
Exactly, because people like you and me look at that and say, ha ha ha, look what we got. Isn't this funny? So it's extraordinarily sad, but it's still happening. And we have an uncle in the family who just sent pictures of his new girlfriend, and to you and me, I mean, he's in his 60s, and this is not his new girlfriend. You can tell by the picture. She's extraordinarily beautiful. It's probably not even her. It's probably somebody else's social media account that they've taken these pictures from, and they're posing as. But he wants to believe in the best. He wants to believe that this is actually happening for him, and that this person is wants to love him and get into a relationship. And obviously, he has this phone conversation, and her webcam isn't working, and
right.
All the hallmarks of this is too good to be true, and this is not really happening. And it took a lot of effort to try to, and obviously being the bad guy, to explain that this is too good to be true, and this is not happening, and don't do this, and
right.
It makes us feel bad of having to explain this, and so talking to, this story is not for our average think like a hacker watcher, but it is, because there is someone in your life who can fall victim to this, right?
Yeah, and just full transparency here, when in our editorial meeting right before we started recording this, I pushed back on this story, and Kathy pointed exactly that out, saying, look, it's not for this is not for our tech savvy audience. This is for the people that they know,
Right.
or are related to and care about and are more vulnerable to this kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. And you can't have a conversation saying, "Oh my gosh, you're going to fall for this." It just makes them feel ashamed, and they're not going to come to you for help. They're not going to want to talk to you about what's showing up in their inbox or what's showing up in their social media or who's calling them. And once somebody gets scammed, it almost seems like they end up on a list of some sort, and these scams start showing up. In other ways, basically trying to, exploit the same human vulnerability.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. So, so you're saying that we, when we're communicating with people who are vulnerable to this, need to deal with it with some empathy, and understanding and compassion. These are folks that didn't grow up with the internet, and they don't need to be humiliated when you're explaining this to them. And I also think that in the InfoSec community, there's a lot of focus on the bleeding edge of research. What's the cool new thing? I want to be the one who breaks that news.
Yeah.
And if you publish something that's even a few days old, you're sometimes ridiculed as, that's yesterday's news. We don't care about that. Well, this is like, 2 decades old, this particular scam, and it's still happening. People are still being targeted. And to Kathy's point, I think it's not helpful in the InfoSec community to kind of laugh this off and say, "Oh my goodness, that's so old. People who fall for that are idiots. Let's try to protect the smart ones." Well, no, and let's try to protect everyone, including the vulnerable
Yeah.
folks. And let's talk about this with the folks that we know that need to be protected against this kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually, I fell for a scam last year.
Oh, do tell.
So I moved into this house, and we're renting this house right now. And there was a post-it note on the door that there was a package, and there was a phone number. And now I know so I call the phone number from my cell phone, and they ask, about my landlord and everything. And I'm like, well, no, I just protected him and didn't give up his information or anything, but asked questions. And then the calls started. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I researched, and yeah, there's this thing in Phoenix where when you move into a new house, they put these Post-it notes on your door, and there's a phone number. And if you call that phone number, you're on a list. So I immediately found this app, and it's this robo-blocking app. And it won't block any number for people that are in my contact list, but it'll block everything else, and it'll block things like what they call neighbor scams. So I don't have a cell phone with a Phoenix area number, or even where I lived up in Northern California. It's from when I lived in Texas, and so any number with that area code I automatically know. I mean, I don't know anybody there anymore, so it's kind of convenient, right?
Right.
But it plays these tapes to these robo scammers that call and engages them in a conversation, and then you get to listen to the conversation of the scammer that's trying to. And I've had some Microsoft tech support scams call and get this robo scam blocker, and it's absolutely hilarious. Not as funny as my teenager who gets these calls and leads them on, but it's really kind of funny. But I think things like this of being able to teach the vulnerable and elderly who might not be aware that tools like this exist to block these kind of scams before they end up having to talk to someone could be something that could be useful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you've given me a how you were scam story. I feel like I need to reciprocate here. So you want to hear mine?
Yeah, totally.
All right. So this was, and we have another story right after this about some scams. So this is going to be the scammer podcast episode. But my story is a kinetic scam, real world scam, right? So I was in London. I was living in London, and I had moved into an apartment complex, and it had a security gate, so you couldn't get in unless you had the code and you actually lived there, or were invited in. And I got a knock on my door, the door of my actual apartment, so you'd have to get through the security gate. And this this young man stood there and said, hey, we're cleaning the windows in the apartments. If you want your windows cleaned, it's going to be £50. And I thought, well, it's a little pricey, but sure, I could like clean windows, so yeah, I'll go for it. So I gave him £50, and he said, all right, great, thanks, I'll have the guys do it. And he headed off. And I closed the door, and I stood there for a moment, and I went, wait, what just happened? That felt weird. And I walked around to my balcony, which faces the outside of the building, and I watched this guy walking down the street with my 50 quid, as they say in London.
Yeah.
And so I went after him. And, I'm not a guy who really knows how to fight. I'm not good at jiu-jitsu or anything like that. But I went after him, and I confronted him, and he was a fairly big chap. And I said, hey, where are you going? Yeah, that was a scam. Give me my money back. And he sort of made as if he was going to hit me, and then changed his mind and decided to give me the 50 back. And I walked away feeling pretty good about that. And but yeah, that was kind of a real world scam that I got taken by, and then I managed to recover from that. But speaking of scams, we've got even more. So the city of Chicago lost more than $1 million, and then they managed to get it back in a phishing scam.
Wow.
And this is covered on Chicago's CBS Local on the 18th of this month. The Department of Aviation received an email January 24th from what appeared to be a city-approved vendor called Skyline Management. The company has been paid more than $250 million for custodial services at Midway O'Hare Airport since 2008. The email requested that Skyline's account payable information be changed from US Bank to Wells Fargo Bank. And of course, that's the attacker's own bank account. The change was made, and less than a month later, the city paid the updated account $1.1 million for services. In a call to the Department of Aviation weeks later, Skyline Management stated that they had not received a payment for their services, and that's when the discovery was made. Skyline never requested an account change, and obviously it was a baddie. The Skyline employee, who, according to the report, said his AOL account may have been hacked at the time in question. And I don't know what that employee would be doing using his AOL account for business, but I guess that was involved somehow. The city later recovered the money after Wells Fargo put a hold on the account, which is amazing because that's actually the first time I've heard of this kind of scam where the money was actually recovered. So since 2013, more than $12 billion was lost worldwide to business email compromises, according to the FBI. And it's just a really interesting story, I think. And I can see how this happens. An employee gets a request to change bank details. They're proactive. They try to do the right thing. There aren't security controls in place to prevent this from happening, and they get taken for over $1 million, I should say. And I think the key here is, as an organization, to have security controls in place to prevent a whole range of attacks that you're going to be targeted with. And there are ways that you can put controls in place to prevent this kind of thing. And it's really a process that you perhaps might put in place where, if you're going to change the bank account for a vendor that you need to pay, it goes through some sort of authentication process. Perhaps you call that vendor back on their phone number, their published phone number, to verify that is in fact their bank, rather than just making the change. What do you think, Kathy?
Oh, definitely. Double check everything, especially in today's, it's everything is so streamlined, and everything is so impersonal, and these scams rely upon you to assume that an email is business as usual. It looks like Amazon, must be Amazon. Looks like Skyline, must be Skyline. And because they rely on your habits and your expectations, we don't ask questions enough. And I think this goes for, this is thinking like a hacker, asking questions.
Yep, exactly. So speaking of business as usual, I have a special treat. So I was prepping for this podcast, reading this article, and I turned to Kerry, who's sitting behind the camera over here and helping out, and I said, hey, and Kerry's our chief financial officer. And I said, hey, we get hit by scams all the time related to trademark, right? And she was like, oh yeah, do you want one of them? And I was like, wait, what? She's like, yeah, it's so frequent that I have the mail here in a bag. And she just pulled out an envelope with one of these scams. And then she pulled out another one. And I held up the envelope, it was unopened. And she said, oh yeah, that's one of those scams. And so what this is, and I'm going to describe it. And there's an argument to be made here that this is a legitimate business practice, but this really is kind of scammy. So what they do is, this is one of the envelopes that we get. It's got the window with our address and so on. Open immediately, and we end up with something looking like that. And it's a trademark scam. And this is saying pending trademark cancellation by USPTO, and our trademark has no, it's not going to be cancelled anytime soon. We have a very large firm of attorneys who think about trademark things for us all the time. But what this is doing is it's sent to our old company name, which is Fijit. We're now Defiant Inc. But it's basically saying that here's your registration number, here's your company name and so on, registration date, and all this information is publicly available on the USPTO.gov's website in their database. So they've just grabbed this from that website. And they're saying that if you want to stop your trademark from being cancelled, send us $890. And one class renewal fee is $890. Each additional class is $550 for a period of 10 years. So they've kind of gained an understanding of the of trademark law. And I mentioned that. So what they want you to do is they want you to sign and return the envelope. And these scams will either ask you to just send a check, or they'll ask you to sign something and put in a bunch of personal information, and then they will invoice you. And of course, you're now waiting for the invoice, and you go ahead and pay it because you're a good accountant or bookkeeper in the company, and they get their money. But I mentioned that this is not necessarily. This company might argue that it's not a scam, and this is I think a US-based company. The reason one might make the argument that it's not a scam is because they're providing a legal service. They're going to actually probably renew your trademark for you, even though it's not going to expire anytime soon. The thing that is deceptive here is the marketing message, that they're claiming that your trademark's going to be cancelled. They're claiming that it costs this much to renew it, when in fact it's far, far less to renew your trademark, and you don't even need their services. But I bring this up, Kathy, because you mentioned that if you can make something look like business as usual, then as an attacker, then you've got a higher likelihood of success. So if you and I was to sit here and think like a hacker for a moment, I think what we would do is think about how we conduct our finances and our accounting and so on, and how other businesses in the United States that are cash rich do that, and how we can kind of integrate our attack into business as usual when we target them, right?
Oh, totally. Definitely. I mean, it's relying on the most vulnerable part of any organization and any infrastructure, and that's human beings.
Exactly. All right. Okay, well, moving on. We've got a little bit of a funny story this week. Should we chat about the influencer economy?
The influencer economy. Oh my gosh.
Ugh.
Yes.
Ugh.
It's out there, but then when you start researching it, it's just kind of like, yeah. Okay, so influencers, what are they? Influencers are basically people who have social media accounts with giant followings. And because there are less eyes on television and there are more eyes on social media, advertisers are turning towards funding influencers to get their product in front of buyers. And according to the Influencer Marketing Hub, which is a real thing, influence economy has grown from $1.7 billion industry in 2016, and it's expected to continue its upward movement to potentially become a $5.6 billion industry. Any marketers surveyed with a digital marketing budget over $500,000 plan to increase influencer marketing. So this came to light to us when one of our teammates posted a funny article on CNN about a bar owner ripping into freeloading influencers who are showing up at the White Banana Beach Club on the island of Siargao in the Philippines, basically asking for free room and board because they're influencers. And the proprietors stated that we would like to suggest that you try another way to eat, drink, or sleep for free, or actually try to work. So people are not thrilled at having these influencers basically expect handouts because they have a huge following on social media. And then we found another story about an influencer named Jessie Taylor, who you really liked her posts, did you?
What? Oh my goodness. That is slanderous.
Mark did not like Jessie Taylor's posts at all. Jessie had her Instagram account with over 100,000 followers, which basically puts you into influencer territory. Had her account deleted because apparently 4chan found her very annoying and started reporting her account. And so the algorithm basically said, okay, this person has had too many reports, and her account went poof. So she went on, I think, YouTube and started crying and received a number of messages and comments on YouTube about her tears. And then she posted a follow-up, which was the one that you really enjoyed, I think. Mark, what was she saying there, that she's leaving the United States?
All right, she's moving to the UK because America is full of haters.
Which is, okay, so there's a number of things going on here because, first of all, there is this entire economy of people with these large social media followings, and marketers are looking at them and saying, hey, there's something here. And I mean, there are dog influencer accounts where, they're selling dog food. And so there's this whole new paradigm of social media that is actually, garnering advertising dollars, which I think is kind of fascinating. I've tried to encourage my dog, instead of, scratching loudly as he's doing right now and interrupting the podcast, to be absolutely adorable and sell dog food, but he just is interested in chicken and not dollars. So I find this very fascinating, but I also think it's that there are a number of people that once they gain this following, they then think that there's this entitlement that because they have a social media following, and who knows whether these are fake accounts or whatever, but they have this sense of entitlement that they can go anywhere in the world and basically demand handouts because of how many Instagram followers they have.
Yeah, so I guess I think these stories are funny, and I think that what's happening is this is a market that is growing up and evolving and maturing, and it's a fairly new thing, and so there's going to be some folks that are making clumsy mistakes and doing silly things and making spectacles of themselves and so on, but I do think that there is a legitimate kind of business model here, and I also think that it's a happy thing that I'm seeing, and I'll describe what I mean. So I think that influencers have been around forever. I remember back in the sort of 2000s, I think it was Paris Hilton and some of her cohort were charging $100,000 to $200,000 to attend a party in Vegas or wherever, and the party organizers would pay that because they want those influential people, those influencers, to be at the party so that other people will come and they'll get more attention. The nightclub will be the place where Paris Hilton hangs out, and for the next 3 months it'll be the hot place to be, or maybe next 3 minutes, the way those things go. But that model has been around for a very, very long time, pre-internet.
Sure.
And I think what's happening now is that people have the ability to gain a following themselves on Instagram, develop their own personal brand, They don't need an agent to do that. They don't need a promoter. They don't need a magazine to publish lots of photos of them and so on. All of those entities have been disintermediated. They've been removed from the equation, and those individuals who are influential, either because they're smart or beautiful or knowledgeable about something or have capabilities that other people don't have, are able to market themselves directly to the public, which I think is really cool. And I think that there are some folks that have built billion-dollar industries by doing that. And I think about the Kardashians, for example, where they are influencers, but what they've actually done is they've built their own business around their own ability to influence people's buying habits, and directly monetized the audience that they have. And then, of course, this model is an influencer for rent, but I think that it also removes some middlemen. It disintermediates some folks that were making money that perhaps they shouldn't have been, and allows those influencers to go directly to a company like Nike or Starbucks or whatever, and kind of market their services. And the influencer doesn't need to work with a publisher or something like that. All they do is they just publish stuff to Instagram or Twitter or whatever, and there's no, you don't need all that infrastructure that goes with it. So it's really cool in what it's enabled, but it is a nascent, emerging industry. It's growing up, and it's fun to watch the clumsiness sometimes, right?
Yeah, it is. What do you think about this situation where the algorithm basically suspended her account, where you're allowing that basically, if you strike a nerve with someone or a group of someone's, that they could take your account down and basically cut off her funding by basically just having enough people go and report her as offensive.
Well, this is something that you and I have chatted about on previous episodes, where we've talked about deplatforming through activism, and where if you make certain groups mad, and maybe it's because you're a bad person or you're a clumsy person or for whatever reason, they can, through activism, get you deplatformed. They'll take, even if you run a WordPress site, they can go after your hosting provider, and make that hosting provider, put enough pressure on that hosting provider, and maybe financial pressure by making them look bad in front of the rest of their customers, to actually have that provider deplatform you. And this is just the same thing, right? It's Instagram or Twitter or whatever this person is publishing on. And I think that can happen through not necessarily the kind of activism that might seem legitimate, but through pranks and that kind of thing as well. So yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, fun times. Isn't the future fun? 2019. Wow.
It sure is.
All right.
Gives us a lot to talk about.
It sure does. Well, that wraps the news for today. Thank you very much, Kathy. And we'll dive straight into the interview.
Awesome.
All right. Today's interview is something a little different. I was recently in Idyllwild, California for a few days, and I made friends with an amazing couple who run a coffee roastery and a tasting room. Chris and Katie Bayer are the owners of Black Mountain Coffee Roasting, and they hand select coffee beans, roast them to perfection in Idyllwild, and ship them to buyers or serve them up in the store. I thought this would be an interesting addition to the podcast because our subject matter is WordPress, security, and innovation. And they are coffee innovators, and they also run a website at BLKMTN Coffee, which is short for Black Mountain Coffee. And they actually chose Squarespace, not WordPress, for their website for some specific reasons that Chris and Katie describe in the conversation that I had with them. I chatted with them about how WordPress can win them back, and it provides some guidelines for WordPress devs on what users need and how we can do better. We also chatted at length about coffee. We talked about coffee trends, how they got started, how to brew the perfect cup of coffee. And the whole time Chris was roasting beans in the store while we chatted, and you can actually hear the beans cracking, which is really cool. If you love coffee and WordPress, you're going to love this interview. Just a note, this interview is on the long side. It runs about 40 minutes, but it's very entertaining conversation, and I didn't have the heart to cut any of it out because it's all so good. It also has some cool visuals, which you'll see if you catch the show on YouTube, so I would encourage you to do that. Here is Chris and Katie Bayer from Black Mountain Coffee Roasting. Enjoy.
I'm Katie Bayer, and you're Chris Bayer. And you're the brains of the operation, and I'm the nose.
There you go.
The brains
No.
and the nose. So yeah, I'm Chris Bayer. I own a little coffee roasting business here in Idyllwild, California, and my wife is the. I would say you're the brains of the operation, and I'm the robot that roasts the coffee. So that's how we describe ourselves. You?
We're in Idyllwild, California, a tiny little mountain town in Riverside County. And
We're about 2 hours north of San Diego and 2 hours east of Los Angeles. So it's a very touristy, weekend-oriented town.
geographical anomaly, 2 hours from everywhere.
And what brought you guys to Idyllwild? Did you grow up here, or did you arrive here from somewhere?
My grandparents used to live here, and when I was a young boy, like maybe 3 or 4 years old, my parents moved up here, and we lived here for about 5 years. And then we moved away when my dad found work somewhere else. But my grandparents lived here from the mid-'70s up until the end of the 1990s. So I spent a lot of time coming up here as a kid and as a teenager, and always felt like home. So when the opportunity to move away from where we used to live presented itself, we kind of jumped at it. That was about 12 years ago. And you also spent time here as a kid.
Yeah, I grew up camping up here and coming up here on the weekends. It was kind of a happy place. So when we were in a position to move up here, we kind of jumped at it. So yeah, it was fun and stupid, crazy.
And kind of all the while not knowing what we were going to do
No.
in terms of making a living or where we would work or how we would manage the need to possibly commute off the mountain for work. So
And so, what was your journey to get to the point where you decided to open a coffee shop? How did that happen?
well, I mean, after about a year of living here in Idyllwild, I started working at the local coffee shop that was open at the time, since closed and been reopened and changed a bit over the years. But I started working there and got trained as a barista. And then within about a year, the coffee shop had changed hands, and I was the manager of the coffee shop there. And another year passed, and I became the roaster for that coffee shop without any prior experience, but kind of a thirst to learn and a real strong desire to make good coffee.
So you became the roaster for that coffee shop, and then you somehow opened your own coffee shop. How did that happen? What was that transition?
The owner of the coffee shop that I was managing decided it was time to move away and sold the coffee shop. We tried to buy it. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. So I went to work doing stuff for another friend for a couple of years, all the while knowing that the goal would be to get to a place where we were running our own business and coffee was going to be the focus one way or another, whether it was a cafe or a roasting business or maybe even just a website where we focused on coffee.
Well, you really missed coffee, and he gets bored easy. And so when he gets bored, he tries to think of new things to do. And with coffee, he never got bored because there was always a new crop and a new bean and a new something. So not getting bored was always awesome.
Yeah, it's like it's own little job security for me to know that there's going to be a new challenge every time I go find a new coffee to bring into the shop and roast and send to our customers.
And so you are creative when it comes to coffee.
I'd like to think that I'm creative. I try not to follow any real formula in terms of like this coffee from this origin or region needs to be or needs to fill this niche. I like to have a wide variety of coffees from different places around the world to different processing methods. And I'm curious enough about new technology in coffee growing and coffee processing to where if there's something new that I haven't had, the desire to try that and see what it's like is what drives me. So whereas I may get bored with something very typical or not be drawn towards something typical. Our customers will dictate whether or not we need to have those kind of typical coffees versus the new and exciting coffees that are at least are new and exciting for me.
So you like spending time on the cutting edge of coffee?
As much as I can. I mean, being here and not, in the tropics somewhere doesn't really allow me to spend that much time. But fortunately, with coffee now starting to be grown in California within an hour or two of here, that'll help to get us to a point where maybe we are on the cutting edge of where coffee can grow and what high-end coffee can be grown even in the United States. Sorry. Delicate touch there. Right now, this coffee's in first crack, and I've turned the gas burners almost completely off, and I've increased the fan speed to get the smoke venting out as quick as I can. And we're actually getting pretty close to the end of the roast cycle here. This will stop around 365, 370, and I'll make that judgment call based on how it looks when it gets there. That alarm means it's at 350. And it's kind of just a reminder to start paying attention to the coffee. Well, to pay closer attention to the coffee.
Yeah. Start multitasking, allocate a bit more resources to the coffee.
Yes. Yeah, I have to kind of divert attention here now.
And what bean are you roasting right now?
This is a natural process coffee from Honduras called Honduras San Jacinto. And it's actually a coffee that we credit our 2.5-year-old son Matthew for choosing. We went to our importer and we did a cupping. And he really wanted to try it.
So he took a sip and he said, good.
Yeah, his reaction, and the name of the coffee being San Jacinto, that's the name of the farm where it's grown in Honduras. It's actually grown by a woman farmer. So there's a lot of really unique things. The bag that we have is one of 40 bags that was produced this year. So 40 150-pound bags of this coffee all year long. We were lucky enough to get one of them. And it's been a coffee that we just love. I mean, we'll be sad when it's gone because it will be gone one day.
What's the most exciting thing in coffee right now? The thing that excites you most? New developments?
One, the opportunity for coffee farms to start in California. That's really exciting. I know that a couple of roasters have been lucky enough to get their hands on some really high quality, high priced coffees that were grown in Santa Barbara County. And then San Diego County's coffees will be hitting the market in the next couple of years. And the other thing is the experimental processing methods that are coming out now. Whereas it used to be most coffees were what's called washed process coffees. We're seeing more natural process coffees coming out of places where the vast majority was all washed coffee. In places like Guatemala, the natural processing just is a new thing there. And then there's some experimental processing going on in places like Ethiopia. I don't know how recent this is, but I was just told about coffees that are being naturally processed, which means they're being dried intact. So the whole fruit is dried and then the bean is removed from the fruit later. But they're doing it in a vacuum now where they'll call it an anaerobic natural process, or they'll do it in a CO2 filled chamber, and that's called a carbonic natural process. So those are coffees I've never roasted, never tried, but I know about them now, and I know that some of them are on their way to the United States on boats now, and I'm definitely on board for that.
Or the new decaf.
And Colombia just came out with a new decaffeination process, or maybe not just, but recently, in the last few years at least, came out with a process for decaffeinating coffee naturally using liquid that's kind of pressed from sugarcane. So they call it sugarcane decaf, whereas before the only natural way to do it was with water. And so far, the sugarcane Colombian decafs are proving to be easier to roast and are going to give roasters an opportunity to do lighter roasts with decaf coffee. So that's exciting for me because dark roasts aren't usually my thing, but with most decaf coffees, you got to roast them pretty dark to get them to the point where they're palatable.
You mentioned that we've got the opportunity to grow coffee in California now. It sounds like some regulatory thing changed or something changed. What happened there?
I think mostly it's agricultural ingenuity and the desire to produce more money with your land. So in San Diego County, especially, I think from what I'm hearing, if what I'm hearing is correct, the avocado industry there is slowly going away because of water, the expense of water, and it's just avocados from Mexico are becoming much cheaper and easier to produce. So there's these smaller plots of land where you can grow coffee, in theory, where they're using I gotta get this right,
No worries.
latitude or longitude. I think it's the latitude. I won't look.
Okay.
That's
think
it.
it's-
Roasted now?
That one's done. Yeah, 17 minutes. That's kind of a long roast process.
Nice.
The first batch sometimes takes longer.
So that some people listen to this on audio. So that noise that they're hearing in the background is the coffee beans unloading from the roaster.
Yeah, I just opened them up. Now they're in the cooling tray, so it's going to be a little bit loud for about 5 minutes while it
totally
cools.
fine. And so the cooling tray stirs.
Uh-huh.
the-
Yeah, I'm sure you'll get some images of that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, in California, the theory is, well, I have to go back. So coffee that is grown at a higher elevation in the tropics or the subtropics is generally higher quality. The plants have to work harder, and the coffee just usually has a cleaner, better flavor to it than coffee that's grown at low elevation. The idea that I think these botanists, I think it was at UC Santa Barbara, came up with was they could replicate the elevation of tropical mountains with the latitude of Southern California and the coastal climate. So the same reason they're growing certain varietals of wine grapes along the coast, they thought they could grow high-end coffee as well. The loss of farmland in San Diego County to the avocado industry has kind of given a little bit of space, agriculturally speaking, for farmers to try and grow coffee. And then, at this point, it's experimental and very expensive, but who knows? What, in another 5 to 10 years, you might see it happening a lot more, which would be kind of cool. I think having coffee grown locally as local could be for us, is neat, because the closest region outside of the United States would be central Mexico, and it's a volatile area, so.
But
prices,
we also like the impact of the business on some underdeveloped countries, like buying things from Guatemala, buying coffees from regions where we feel good about putting our money into a small farm or a farmer's family, or I don't know. You finish.
Right. There's a lot of great stories out there of coffee farmers and what they're doing locally, where they're living and where they're employing people and where they're helping to educate children and provide clean drinking water. I mean, that's all part of the coffee growing industry. And I think American companies that are dealing directly with those farmers are helping to encourage them to be good to the people that make their farm actually operate. And not that they wouldn't be good to their employees and people that are working for them in general, but the more we're willing to pay for a cup of coffee or a bag of coffee beans, that impact will be seen directly in those communities around the world. And it's not just Central America, South America, we're talking Africa, Indonesia, it's literally around the world. So understanding that when you choose a coffee, you are having a direct impact one way or another on a farmer or somebody who works on the farm or the children of those people. It's kind of an empowering thing to think of as a consumer, to know that this coffee came from this particular place, and somehow, some way, through the magic of capitalism, maybe you're impacting people far away.
Very cool. So you guys are kind of a family business in every sense of the word, right?
Yeah. The only
Kind
people
of
that the
all
only
the way.
family members that don't make it to the shop are our dog and our cat. They get to stay home when we come to work. So
It's us and our kids all the time. It's
Sometimes I'm here by myself.
Well, yeah.
If there's a lot of roasting that has to be done on a day where we're not open typically for tasting, um, then I get some quiet time while I
Yeah.
roast.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a family business in every sense. Two little boys running around here terrorizing our customers every weekend. Having a lot of fun while we work too, and being together as a family almost all the time is it's a big priority for us.
And I want to ask you, how do you achieve work-life balance? But it seems like that question doesn't apply because you've integrated the two.
Work is life, and life is work, and our shop is, it just is. It's not, they're not separate. There's not, different hats that you put on to do different things. You're doing it all at the same time, and that's real life. So you don't get to compartmentalize when you're a family, when you're a business owner, because it's all the time. It's everything all the time.
It seems innovative, but let me interject. It's pretty old school. I mean, this is how businesses were run 100 years ago. Like the kids were there working alongside parents. Not that our kids are working. We're not into child labor, but
But he'll come
one
around and say,
day-
"Careful, coffee hot."
one day they'll get a responsibility here at the shop. And right now it's just clean up your toys or show this person where the bathroom is. But when they get older, they'll be more integrated into the business, whereas maybe they're labeling bags or maybe they're helping dad weigh out coffee to roast, or who knows, delivering coffee on their bike maybe one day. I have no idea where it's headed, but I can speak for my family not me in my immediate family, but my dad and his siblings grew up in my grandparents' business. And I'm pretty sure that my grandparents grew up in their parents' business on my dad's side. So it's something that the desire for that has always kind of really been there for me. And I don't know if that's just because that's how my dad's side of the family came up, but it seems to make sense, I suppose.
So Carrie and I work together as well, and we also are business owners. And I've had this thought that, and you kind of said this, and that is that humans have been doing that mode of work where couples work together and the family kind of works together for way longer than we've doing this kind of than we've been doing this kind of modern specialization in the industrial, post-industrial revolution
Yeah.
way of doing things, where the one of them splits off, goes to work in a large group of people and does a very specialized task. It seems like couples working together on a business, which in a lot of cases was a farm,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. They've been doing that for a very long time, and it almost seems like now a lot of people are going back to that. Where
I think it's
couples
important.
are working together, and it's their own business.
I think it's important. I think that things have kind of taken a turn and not a good one. And I think part of it is, couples not learning to work together. Couples not, like, oh, I can't do that. That's too much. We're together all the time. And, you have your moments or whatever, but it's fine. And if you're not fine together, there may be a problem. But, the kids need to see you working on conflict resolution. I'll do that again. But I think it's important for people in general and kids to see us working on our conflict resolution, and that's a part of real life. You have to work and figure it out on the fly. It's not this cookie cutter anything. It's real life, and your actions matter, and you have natural consequences and in business and in life. So how better to teach the kids and people that are thinking about getting married, what it really looks like. I don't know. That's, for me, I feel like it's kind of important to be honest and open and transparent.
Yeah. That's really interesting what you're saying. So your kids are around a couple interacting in a normal way. Well, most of the time, right? and
If we're
so
normal.
they actually see how normal couples function, whereas a lot of kids will be at school and then maybe taken care of while both
School,
parents
a
work
babysitter,
and so
a
on. So they don't see
nanny.
that family
Yeah.
interaction. So you're saying that's a strength. It's good for the kids.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of we've gone to a weird place where it's like totally okay for somebody else to spend their majority of the time with your children. I don't know. It's they're learning from somebody else. They're learning from uh, schools and preconceived notions, as opposed to, like, I don't care, how soon you learn the ABCs or how well you do math. I care about if you're a decent person and if you're able to see people and take care of a need. And that's more important to me, to that they grow up to be decent human beings and not and not maybe smart in a conventional way or a testable way, maybe. I don't know. That's kind of.
They're gonna know how to roast coffee, so they'll be fine.
If they don't want to roast coffee, they don't have to.
As long as they can weigh things and roast coffee, they'll be able to take care of
finding,
themselves.
I think it's important to help them find a passion and find a way to
Right.
make a difference and to integrate with our culture and our community, and realize that each person that they interact with is, for us, not only potential customer, but another person in our community. So just helping them learn how to take care of people, I think, is important.
So as two business founders that work together, and I'm asking this from the position of having my wife be my co-founder who's standing behind the camera. Do you guys do you find that challenging in any way, or is it all just love and roses all day long?
Love and roses, for sure.
Everything is work at this point in our lives. Like, not in a negative sense, but like
in
our
an
marriage
intentional
is work.
sense.
Our raising children is work. Work is obviously work. And we're doing our best to kind of keep a level head and stay sane while we do this. But like the need for time away and a vacation and maybe a date night every 6 months or so. Those are things that matter, and things that we are getting, I think, better at trying to make time for. Work just has to happen. It's just one of those things where
It's finding moments inside of work, where the kids are playing nice or they're taking a nap, and we're getting the shop cleaned up and things are like running smoothly, and you take a moment and you're like, all right, that's what this is about. It's not about.
It's funny because a close friend of mine that I worked for a little while before we started this, was helpful, because he said, you're going to work more than you've ever worked in your life, but it's not going to all feel like work. And they did a very similar thing with their small business, where their kids grew up in the office and they go to work with mom and dad when they're not in school, and they know how to behave there. They know what their responsibilities are. Now they make a little bit of money through the business for doing the tasks that they're able to do. And it's kind of been an encouragement to us to see that we're not the only ones, especially in a town like Idyllwild, that are able to do that. And living in a different place, it may not be looked at as so acceptable, maybe. I don't know.
It's pretty abnormal for Southern California, for sure.
Well, we're 10 plus years removed from the hustle and bustle of life in the rest of this region. And Idyllwild's a special place because of that. And because we're close to big cities doesn't mean we function the way they do.
So you guys had a fire in August. The Cranston fire.
Cranston fire, I think it started at the end of July, but we were gone until the beginning of August. Yeah.
What was the effect of that on you and your business?
It was pretty devastating. I think one of the things that most small business owners in Idyllwild do, ourselves included, is kind of second guess the decision to evacuate when there's a mandatory evacuation.
Life.
We've had loads of acquaintances and friends that have small businesses here that have stayed through things like that, and have kind of won praise from the fire department for sticking it out, staying behind, helping to feed the crews that are here. volunteering their time, and then there's those that were like, it's just not worth the risk to our family. We can rebuild. Like, things are insured. Um,
Everything's replaceable.
Everything's replaceable except for the four of us in our case. So we packed up everybody, the dog and cat included, and we were gone for about a week, and then things were really abnormal for at least the rest of the summer until the fall. The fire was. It's something that unfortunately we kind of have to live with that kind of in the back of our mind all the time here. I know that our first experience with fire was in 2013, and that was the mountain fire. We were evacuated for about a week then as well. And since then, when it's in the warmer months, when it's dry, as soon as you smell any kind of smoke, like could be a car, could be somebody maybe with a fireplace going for some strange reason, or a campfire sometimes even, it kind of makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, and you kind of have that thought like, okay, where's all my things that I need to grab in order to evacuate if we're forced to evacuate again. So again, it's just part of life. It's not something that we fear necessarily, but it's definitely a hindrance to business. Fortunately for us, we didn't miss like our monthly club shipment that month. By some stroke of a miracle, we were able to send off our coffee shipments before that happened. That hasn't always been the case, but we didn't miss a beat, and nothing was damaged. So our home was, luckily, or spared based on a number of factors. But in our business, when we came back, everything was untouched. So we didn't have to worry about the things that you might have to worry about in other places.
And then, as if that wasn't enough, the roads washed away.
Yeah,
in
so
February.
Kind of a side effect of a big fire is if you get a big rainy season, there's a lot of flash flooding and mudslides and things like that. And so, yeah, we were heavily affected by a really big storm that came through on the 14th of February this year, and that washed out two of the main highways that bring tourists to Idyllwild. Not only tourists, but it's the main road for kids to travel up and down to go to high school. A lot of people we know work down the mountain, and that's the routes that they take. So whereas our business suffered from the loss of tourist travel, a lot of our friends and people in our community suffered that they weren't able to get to work. They may have lost a job. And so kind of keeping those things in sight, even though we had like
it's an inconvenience, but we're okay.
Some of the slowest months of our small businesses experience in the last couple of years, we're here. I mean, we're not in danger of closing up or selling off inventory or anything like that. So again, we've been really fortunate that even though we've been through the storms, we've been able to weather them, and we'll be here. We'll be here for, the foreseeable future, for sure.
So, Chris?
Yeah.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, and you as well, Katie, maybe you handle the site, but do you guys have a website?
Yeah, we do. We actually started our business from home via the internet. It's blkmtncoffee.com. So it's kind of the abbreviated version of Black Mountain Coffee. And we started with offering a coffee club membership, and then people can buy one bag. You can buy as much coffee as you'd like online. I try to keep it updated, but I'm not like the technical wizard that some people are. In terms of updating, I usually update the coffees that are available as they change. Sometimes that lags a week or so behind. And then with the magic of email notifications, whenever we get new orders, they're pretty easy to fill because, my phone dings or my computer dings at me. And I check it and see where the coffee's got to go.
And who created your site for you? Did you guys do it yourselves?
I was. How should I describe this? I decided to go with Squarespace, kind of as an all-in-one for an online store. I did a little bit of research and looked into what I thought I was capable of. I've got some friends that have built sites with WordPress, and so that was initially an option, but I felt like I didn't have the knowledge to do that myself, so I opted to go with the all-in-one ease of Squarespace's platform.
So you felt like with WordPress there was a steep learning curve.
I didn't even really give it that much thought. I asked a few friends that had built WordPress sites how they did it, and a couple of them had said that they had paid a developer or a web designer to do it for them, and then that they manage it. So knowing the people that I asked and knowing what I thought I was capable of, I just decided that it wasn't really worth the time it was going to take me to learn it. Although now that we're 2 years plus into the business, I'm feeling like our website's a little outdated, and streamlining things financially are something I think about often. So rebuilding the website with WordPress is something that I've actually given a considerable amount of thought of now, especially since I already have a website up and running.
Well, and our goal too in this startup was to be intentional about starting with no debt, doing things as we can, and so it's all been sort of cost based, from thrift store finds to doing everything that we can ourselves.
Yeah.
And so with Squarespace, did you not need a developer, and were you able to create the site on your own? Was that one of the goals?
When I signed up for my account, you'll have the option to look at. I'm sure there's a number of different platforms that are similar. A bunch of different design templates that are somewhat customizable, and then they have their own. I don't know what you call it, web store integration, essentially, that you pay for. So you can build your online store inside of the website, and it's all at this point relatively seamless. You work off of the left side of your page in the main menu section, and uploading images and uploading text and things of that nature are all fairly intuitive and simple. But you don't have that much flexibility in comparison to what I've seen with WordPress.
But you're crazy smart, so.
But you did it all. So you did it all yourself, though, right?
I did. The only thing I didn't do was take the photos and videos for the initial web page stuff.
The reason I'm asking about how you created your site is because in our community, in the WordPress community, we've been working for quite a long time now to try to make it easier for people to get up and running. And I think it seems like the big decider for you was that you didn't need a developer, but
Right.
because you used Squarespace, and you felt like you needed a developer if you used WordPress. And I think that sounds about right, because for WordPress, what people will usually do is they'll have a custom theme made, or they'll use an off-the-shelf theme, but sometimes that doesn't give you everything that you want.
Even for me, I think it was a little bit daunting researching hosting versus domain registry. Those kind of things also played a factor into it. Squarespace made it very simple to just say, here's my money, this is the website name that I'd like, or something similar to this, and then let me see what you've got to offer in terms of templates and then store layout. So the fact that it was one-stop shopping was a big factor for me. I didn't have to put that much thought into it. And then once I started playing with it, the ease of use, bearing in mind I had no experience with WordPress or building a website any other way, was really what sold me. And the cost is reasonable in my my opinion. Obviously it's more than what a WordPress site would have cost me had I been able to build it myself, but I felt that money spent on Squarespace's platform was going to be an investment towards a simpler startup and making money faster. That's really what were the determining factors in that.
And I guess for you to go over to WordPress now from Squarespace, there would need to be a compelling business reason, right? Like, we're going to make more money, or we're going to save a bunch of money.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like anything else. I feel like costs are just going to continue to rise slowly but surely. And I've noticed that Squarespace's charges they're increasing. They're not going to stay what they were when I started forever. So in an effort to increase profits, we'll try to cut costs where we can. And if we can build a site that functions well, that is maybe even more integrated with what we do here in the shop in the future, then yeah, we'll definitely go that route.
Interesting. We have obviously a lot of WordPress people listen to this show, and so I wouldn't be surprised if some folks reach out to you and say, hey, did you know that you can do this, or that WordPress is capable of this that Squarespace can't do. So that might be interesting data for you.
An interesting fact that I met a friend or made a friend who is a developer, and he kind of specializes in back-end integration for websites. And he has done a lot with like shipping companies and Shopify back-end type things, where integrating orders into a shipping utility, essentially. Those are things that he's worked on. We've talked a lot about the dysfunctionality of some of the Squarespace things versus what WordPress would be able to do, especially with somebody who is, professionally developing software to kind of overcome the challenges that I'm having. Those are all things that are really interesting, that it's doable with the right knowledge.
How does one brew the perfect cup of coffee?
Wow.
I think it's different for everybody. Everybody has a personal preference and a taste. So, what he likes brewed a certain way is not necessarily what I like brewed a certain way. But usually between the two of us, we can come up with some great...
Yeah, I think there's a lot to the perfect cup of coffee. A lot more than just the coffee itself or the brew method. Wow. But in terms of
water,
how do I brew the perfect cup of coffee? I start with a set ratio or a given amount of coffee, and then I use a given amount of water. And I have my preferred technique of the V60 pour over to make pretty much what I would say is the best cup of coffee around. Okay, so we're going to make a V60 pour over. This is how we do our tastings. Everything we do for tasting, apart from cold brew, is going to be made this way. I just weighed out 25 grams of coffee. I ground it in our little conical burr grinder back there. And now I'm going to set this whole device on a scale, and that's going to weigh what's there, and then it's going to zero itself out. And as soon as I start pouring water, it's going to start a timer. So the timer is a double check to make sure that the grind is correct and that the brew happened appropriately. So the scale's ready, so now I'm ready. I have to wait on that. The water is going to be in the neighborhood of 200 degrees. And I'm going to pre-wet the grounds with about 20% of the total volume of water I'm going to use to brew. 25 grams of coffee. I'm going to pour over that, 360 grams of water. So that's our 15-to-1 ratio that we like here. I'm going to wait about 30 seconds for that coffee to bloom. And the scale says it's ready again, so here we go. We're going to pour the rest of the water.
So you pour, and then you take a break, and the coffee blooms. I guess that means it expands.
Fresh coffee.
Yeah, it's going to release some CO2, and it's going to get the coffee ready to give up its goodness to the remaining water. And then I'm going to try to pour evenly, try to get through the dark spots. Some people stir their pour-overs. I'm not a big believer in messing with it. I think that the finished product, it should all kind of adhere to the sides of the filter in the V60, and that's kind of what the goal is, to get a nice even extraction, and that is evidence as well as the amount of time that it takes. So I'm done pouring water. Now we wait. It's probably going to be about 2 minutes for that to drain through.
Yeah.
We're at a total brew time right now of about 1.5 minutes. This is El Salvador La Providencia. It's a natural processed coffee, and it's a medium roast, but it is a full-bodied coffee. So some people might taste it and think that it's a darker roast than it actually is.
Awesome.
I'm going to go for it, too.
Cheers.
Yeah, thanks again.
Do you get that little blackberry note on the finish? That's where like the natural process comes in.
It's kind of
It's really nice. It's got it's an earthy taste, a little chocolatey, not big on the fruity notes. I mean, I'm trying to use the little vocabulary that I have here to describe this.
It's a subtle fruitiness. It's not overpowering like an Ethiopian
it's
natural.
Super smooth.
Yeah. You know, I'm an amateur here, but the most notable thing for me is that it feels like it tastes like the perfect brew. It's not too strong and it's not too weak. It's exactly right to be able to taste the coffee.
Yeah, that's that. Finding a brew ratio that works for you and your equipment and your taste preference, all those things. And he's agreeing with us next door. I don't know if you can pick that up, but
Family business.
Yeah.
he's excited about this coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's
If
great.
you don't-
Audience can't smell how delicious this smells. I'm gonna come out from behind the camera.
Oh yeah, please. And there's more. I made
Yeah.
enough.
This is a non-coffee
Here.
drinker.
Here, do you want to? We'll pour her
Your
some.
coffee smells so good that the non-coffee drinker came from behind the camera to give it
Awesome.
a taste.
And that's one of the fun things about what we do. We've met a few people that are like in their 70s that have never drank coffee before, and their kids are into coffee, and they'll come in as a family, and oh, what the heck, I'll give it a go. We'll see what it is, and they're surprised at how much they enjoy something that they've never taken the time to have.
And so I want to make sure that folks know how to find you guys, whether they visit Idyllwild or whether they want to find you online. So if you're in Idyllwild, give us some directions to get to the store.
Wow. So we are right off of North Circle Drive, which is the main road through the downtown area of Idyllwild. We're just a little bit further up the hill than most of the businesses in town. We're in a little plaza called the Oakwood Village, and we're in unit number 7. So way at the back. If you know what the smell of coffee roasting is, you'll probably be able to follow your nose to our door. And then you'll see people walking away happy with cups in their hand, hopefully, too. Or bags of coffee, even better.
Awesome. And then you guys sell online.
We do.
How does that work?
We have a few options for online sales. People are welcome to buy one bag at a time if they want, or they can buy multiple bags, or we offer a coffee club subscription as well. That's like a monthly billing, happens automatically, and every month we send out the desired amount. We start at 2 bags a month for $30, and it goes up from there. I think we have up to 8 bags a month. It's something more designed for an office crew that wants to go in on coffee together. But a lot of our customers are happy with 2 bags or 4 bags a month, and 4 bags would go to $50 a month, plus shipping.
And then the bags that you're doing each month, does that vary depending on what you are interested in?
So one of the goals initially was, because I get bored so easily, was to send out a new coffee every month, at least 1 new coffee. Sometimes it's 2 new coffees every month. It just kind of depends on how fast we're moving through product. And then usually seasonally, we'll do a seasonal blend offering as well. So I think last month I sent out what we called the winter washout blend, which was essentially some coffees that we had that we liked, that we thought would be better together as a seasonal blend. So we did that, and hopefully our customers that received that loved it as much as we did. And then we do wholesaling, we do obviously retail here in the store, and it's just been a crazy adventure and a lot of fun.
Great. And if people want to join the coffee club or order from you, how do they find you online?
It's blkmtncoffee.com, and if you click buy coffee on the landing page, it'll take you right to the store, and you'll see what we have currently offered.
Awesome. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for
It was
the
our
wonderful
pleasure.
conversation. It's been interesting. We chatted about a whole bunch of different things, and I really
Absolutely.
appreciate the time that you took while you're roasting. You're roasting while chatting.
Sometimes you gotta
Which is
multitask.
awesome.
All the
Yeah.
time you have to multitask.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and we've been back several times, and we'll keep coming back because the coffee here is amazing. Take my
Awesome.
word for it. Cheers.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much.
Yeah.
All right, thanks very much to Chris and Katie for chatting with me in Idyllwild. We actually filmed next week's interview in their store as well. Chris and Katie were kind enough to loan us the space. I chatted with John Brown, who is the owner of 9 Seeds Agency, and I think you'll really enjoy that interview. So that'll be next week. You can find Chris and Katie at blkmtncoffee.com. That's short for Black Mountain Coffee. And I would encourage you to join their coffee club to get the amazing beans that Chris roasts, and perhaps even some of the ones that you saw him roast on the video footage there. You can follow Kathy Zant on Twitter at Kathy Zant. You can follow me at MMAUNDER or mmaunder. You can find us on YouTube or on your favorite podcasting platform. If you are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Liking helps promote the podcast, and subscribing ensures that you get alerted when we put out a new episode. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye, everyone.